Hey guys, welcome to Bada Boom. Very special episode because now we're at 6 episodes of The Last of Us, and I think it's time to revisit the show and bring on our resident hater, Mike.
That's right, I'm here to hate, and oh boy, there is a lot to hate.
Funny enough, I'm actually on your side on this one. I think the last episode of The Last of Us, there was a lot to hate, and not necessarily in the performances of the story, but I felt like King Julian. I was like, how long is this gonna take throughout the episode? But yeah, what have you thought of? First, we'll talk about the last episode, episode 6. From my understanding, was covered in a DLC of the original Last of Us game. Was it called Left Behind, or what
That's
was it
correct,
called?
it was Left
Called
Behind,
Left
yes.
Behind.
The episode was
Uh,
also called Left Behind.
oh, okay, gotcha. Well, it left me asleep. But but yeah, so we're gonna talk about that episode. What did you think about it? And if you didn't like it, was it something that you felt like the game did better, or you felt was not properly represented?
Well, so just quick correction, this is actually the 7th episode, but, you wouldn't be f
Ah,
I'm gonna forgive you for that one because it does feel like, the show is dragging a little bit, so I'm not surprised that you actually thought it was the
wait a minute.
6th.
Isn't there only 9? So you're telling me there's only 2 more episodes, and they haven't gotten any? Oh, you go ahead.
Yeah, well, that's kinda what we have to talk about is that, the show is really taking its time. And particularly in this episode where I feel like the story could have very much been wrapped up by like a monologue by Ellie. Have Bella Ramsey, show off her acting chops. She's been doing very well in the show so far, and I feel like something similar to the. I know not a lot of people liked it, but something similar to the ending of The Leftovers, where the main character basically just walks us through her story, and I feel like that would have been a lot more effective in this particular episode because we leave at a moment of extreme tension. Joel's really hurt, and instead of focusing on that, we go off into the past again, and it really takes away from the tension of that. And why it works with the game is because the DLC was released after the game. And in the game, immediately after Joel is hurt, the game switches your control over to Ellie, which had never happened before in the game. That's the first time that happens. And it really sets it up like Joel is dead. That's actually how I felt the first time I played the game. I was convinced that Joel was gone because also what happens in the game is he gets hurt way worse than he does in the show. In the show, he just gets stabbed. In the game, he falls off a two-story balcony and gets impaled by a piece of rebar. It
Yeah,
makes it
but
much more apparent that he might actually be dead, which is what I thought when I first played the game. And in the show, we just immediately see that he's alive and that Ellie is stitching him up. And it works in the game because the DLC came out after the game. So it was this little story where you kind of already knew what was going on, and the background it gave you was just better formatted uh, when it was shown after the events of the game. And the way it's presented in the show, I just really didn't like it. What did you think?
yeah, I think something that well, I think that the structure and the story is right, but I think this is something that all post-apocalyptic shows run into. We saw it with The Walking Dead, where there's not much story to tell. And because there's not much story to tell, you end up going into flashbacks and using the same tricks to kind of get people emotionally involved. It's like you've done the flashback thing like 4 times already. At this point, I'm numb to it. And something that's supposed to kind of give us more perspective, I felt like just it didn't. I feel no different. And the show's gotten to episode 7, which in my head I thought we were at episode 6. And the series high points all don't have Joel and Ellie in it. So what I'm concerned about, I'm sure you're worried about, is that by the time we get to the end, some of the decisions that need to be made and the big, you know, plot developments that need to happen won't really have that emotional kick because guess what? We haven't really spent much time with these characters in the present. Um, and it goes to the trouble with video game adaptations. In the game, yeah, the DLC came out after, but you're also a participant in it. You're experiencing it. You're controlling Ellie. So some of the things about, looking at the walls, playing the game and all that, taking your time, it's a better experience when you're doing it through a game. But when you're watching a show and they haven't progressed at all, and you're not, in between that killing zombies yourself, it becomes really boring. And these last two episodes have really been that.
Yeah, we've had 4 episodes since we did the review of the Bill and Frank episode, which was, episode 3. We've had 4 episodes since then, and only 1 has significantly developed, Joel and Ellie's relationship, and that was episode 6, the one that we had before when they're in the town with Tommy, and that's really the only real development of their relationship we've had in a pretty long time, because it's the episode where we find out, what Joel really thinks of Ellie and what Ellie really thinks of Joel. And since we're on the topic, I actually felt that it was handled much better in the game because and this actually ties into another thing that I noticed about the show, where since the beginning, Joel has been set up as very frail. He's got hearing problems, he's getting panic attacks, his knees are giving out. He's really not all that great in a fight. And I was kind of curious why they were doing that because in the game, he's an extremely capable fighter. Like, yeah, he's getting up there in age, but it's never even hinted at that he has any kind of like physical shortcomings. And the reason it's in the show is because the reason that Joel wants to leave Ellie with Tommy is because he's scared of his own physical limitations. He has that really well acted scene with Pedro
Yeah.
Pascal where he's talking about how he's old, people are getting the drop on him, and he's just going to get Ellie killed. Now contrast that with the game where the reason Joel even goes to Tommy isn't because he's looking for him or he cares about him. He just wants to dump Ellie on him. He doesn't want the responsibility. It has nothing to do with his physical limitations. He just doesn't want to do it. He just doesn't want to deal with it. He doesn't want to confront the trauma of his past. And I think it's handled a lot better in the game because it's far more interesting for a character to not do something because they have a personal flaw rather than because they just have like a physical limitation.
Yeah,
And I
because
feel
he
the
has a
show got
bum knee.
yeah, exactly. And that's just not very interesting. And speaking of not interesting, episodes 4 and 5 were not very interesting either. Those episodes you brought up The Walking Dead earlier, and those episodes really felt like The Walking Dead, especially the really poorly handled action. I know a lot of people like that sequence with the infected coming out of the
Yeah.
ground, but there was a particular shot. It's a shot right before the big one, the bloater comes out of the ground, and it's like really bad slow mo. Like it's shockingly bad. So I can only assume that it wasn't originally meant to be slow mo because it was still filmed at 24 frames per second. And the slow mo shot of Perry like backing up, it just looks really bad. I guess they didn't tell the DP what was going to happen. That's another thing that I didn't like. And also, just more importantly, nothing of substance really happens in episode 4 and 5. And so episode 6 kind of picks that back up with the character development. And then once again, we get into the dumps with episode 7. So I guess my question to you would be, do you feel like this episode was really necessary? Especially given the fact that it's very similar to episode 3 with Bill and Frank. And because that episode was so strong and it kind of tells a similar story, it feels like we're kind of retreading old ground.
It's necessary to fill the season order to HBO. That's the only way I see it necessary. I think it probably would have actually been cool as a bonus episode. You know what I mean? Like you saw Netflix do that with Sandman, where they released like an animated episode to kind of like, hey, here's a little tease. We don't know if we're doing season 2 yet. But in the context of them going through this story and stuff, I actually find it like the less I knew about Ellie, the better. It was just because it felt like it was the same thing with Joel, where you could kind of fill in the blanks and you're really focused on the story right now in the moment. And the show seems to keep going back. And that goes back to the limitations of these post-apocalyptic stories. They could be really great, they could be the road, and if you're really focused, but you could probably at best get 6 hours of good content out of one particular story before it becomes stale and repetitive, because guess what, everyone's miserable, everyone's trying to kill each other. So I think that's a natural flaw with these kind of stories, and you kind of see it with, The Last of Us Part Two. Is like, how many times do you have to tell us everyone, hey, violence is bad, everyone's killing each other, there's no such thing as good, there's a gray and stuff. It gets really old. And we both love the first season of The Walking Dead, and I think it's one of the most perfect seasons of TV ever because it's only 6 episodes. There is not
Exactly
a
right. Yeah.
second wasted on that show. And what's sad is because of the financials of certain things, unless it's billed as a mini series, no one's ever making 6 episodes, unless it's of course Disney, where they're basically using the budget of a movie and splitting it up into 6 hours. But I think The Walking Dead season one is so perfect because nothing's wasted. It's those 6 hours. You're not really doing flashbacks and stuff like that. You're living in the moment. You have this character that was literally plucked out of time because he was in a coma, waking up, experiencing these things for the first time. Whereas with this, it's like, again, and something I'm glad you brought up is sort of the physical aspect of Joel. Part of what the game does is like, it gives you this character that's such a badass that in all these situations, it feels like you can navigate them and stuff. And I get the idea of being like, hey, if we nerf them a bit, you can feel the tension. You could feel that they may not make it out of this. But the reality is, it seems like he was the worst person to dump Ellie off with. It's like, hey, it seems like you've gotten fucked up every single time you've gotten into a confrontation. And even when they get to Kansas City, Ellie has to shoot that dude in the back, and you're like, well, there's about 5 or 6 times you could have died on this trip alone. So um, I don't know. I think it's well acted. It's at times has really high emotional notes, but it is getting into that territory of being like let's get on with it. What's next? And the fact that we probably only have 2 episodes left and nothing's really happened is worrisome, because the next episode seems like another detour. Um, and it's like, okay, if that's the next episode, then the finale, is it going to be 2 hours? Is it going to be, we haven't seen a firefly in sight. All these things is just like, it's adding up. And I think the shine of those first couple episodes are really rubbing off, which sucks. I think people are really responding to it still. I still see people talking about it, giving it high praise, but to me, it's gotten really, really slow. Like, I was watching that last episode and I couldn't tell you the amount of times I'm like, oh, don't go to sleep. Don't go to sleep. And, it's supposed to be, this emotional thing, but I think what does the cast a little bit of injustice, it's like, hey, you did this already. You've already done this season. You know what I mean? It would have been fine if you're like, hey, this is our Bill and Frank episode of season two. You know what I mean? Some people do that. You remember with True Detective, they always found the way to do the project shootout in
Yes.
one of the
Yes.
seasons, where it's like, hey, we got to hit that note, we got to play the hits, we got to do that remix and stuff. But when you do it in the same season, it definitely does not have that feel. And it sucks because I think Storm Reed was a great guest actress. She did her thing. It was cool, but the whole time I was like, let's get back to Joel dying, and like, can they fix this like half an hour into the episode and get back on the road? And you're right, like, I didn't know that part about the video game, but like the fact that he just got stabbed, and I was like, I mean, granted, I'd be pretty fucked up if I got stabbed, but in the context of a TV show where this guy is supposed to be, um this very capable person that could, almost survive or anything, he's just like, yeah, I'm dead. just
Yeah, and I hate to
yeah,
interrupt you here, but I have to
yeah.
bring up the stupid trope of people coming in from off screen and doing the damage because that's the same way he gets caught in Kansas City, and it's the same way he gets caught again. It's the same trope over and over again. So that's also
Yeah.
really annoying.
It goes back to the zombie. I think they use all of the post-apocalyptic and zombie horror like tropes, and they keep pressing that that staples that was easy button all the time. And I think what's happening too is like you're seeing the shine of the Last of Us story as a video game kind of coming off too, because you realize like, hey, part of that was the experience, was being able to physically play that and play through that, and that's how you got attached to these characters. Whereas this, you're not really a participant. You're a passenger, and you're watching it, and it just doesn't hit in certain parts. I think it does
It's
early
definitely
on.
not as engaging. Definitely
Yeah,
not
so
as engaging.
so because you're not engaged, like for example, it's very easy to fall asleep during these episodes where it feels like you're dragging. And video games all have those. It's the nature of it, fetch quests and things to kind of keep that. If you're paying $60 for a game, you better get those at least 15 hours out of it. Whereas with this, it's like, hey, like truly, I know people are like, oh, series are the way to go. This probably should have been a 2-hour movie.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah,
I talked
yeah,
about in our when we reviewed the first 3 episodes. Like,
yeah.
if you take the content of the story, it's actually perfect for a feature.
Yeah. So I don't know where it's going, but I have definitely turned from, hey, this is like amazing. I don't think all of it was a waste of time because the story in Kansas City, I didn't experience that in the game, so that was really emotional for me. But all of these other episodes have felt like, yeah, and the another thing is the action has not felt really good. Going back to The Walking Dead, it's felt like that. And at times it feels like Arrow. Like I don't know if you ever watched Arrow, but those first few seasons, they always went back to the island in flashbacks. And the reason for that is that because they had a 22 season order, they had to fill a bunch of time. And that's what it feels like with these flashback episodes. Hey, we don't have enough story to get us to that compound at the end of the game. So we're going to fill it with as much filler and side quests as much as we can. And the quality has definitely suffered from that.
It's funny that the show actually ends up feeling more bloated than the game. Usually, you would think about games being, padded for length, try to get
Mm.
that runtime as long as possible, but it's actually the show that's doing it. But listen, unlike the creators of the show, we understand that brevity is the soul of wit. So we're just gonna leave it there. We've said what we had to say. There's no reason to harp on it. We are not as big a fans of the show as we were going into it. The first 3 episodes were good, and the episodes since then haven't been as good. And hopefully hopefully this is just the valley and we're gonna reach the peak at the end of it. That's what I'm hoping for.
Oh, hope for Mike. Would you look at that? He must have really loved the game. But yeah, like you said, we're not gonna have you going through this like I was going through the last episode of The Last of Us, trying to stay up for the sake of this podcast. But thank you guys. Thank you, Mike, for coming on and always bringing this insight, especially considering I didn't play the game. I just watched it and, skipped to the end so that I could get what everyone was talking about. But thank you guys.
And make sure to join us for the season finale review that we will definitely be doing.
And we will definitely be hating
Oh,
at this point.
absolutely.
Okay. Bada boom.
Bada boom.